Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And if you are watching us live tonight, you are seeing some fresh new graphics, a brand new intro. We have to shout out longtime patron Matt Winters for helping us put this together. He did excellent work. This is a new look that we're bringing you in 2025. On my end, I was glad to not have to hear that Bon Iver cover of elevator music anymore leading into the countdown. So that was good. I feel a little bit more energized tonight, but a lot of good stuff coming up here in 2025 on Orioles on the Verge. And on tonight's episode, we're going to break down the Orioles signing of Charlie Morton to a 1-year, $15 million contract. And then we'll check back in later this week with our minor league roster predictions here on Orioles on the Verge, which is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, to NHL and UFC, BetOnline is the number one sports betting source for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. And before we get into tonight's show, we're going to welcome a couple of new patrons to our community, our first two new patrons of 2025. And for that, I will turn it over to Bob.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome aboard to JJ as well as Nick Brooks, both signed up in the new year. And hey, I think 2025 is going to be a great year for the Orioles, a great year for us, and a great year for patrons who join us. So thank you guys for signing up, and I hope you enjoy the content.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into tonight's show, we do want to acknowledge the passing of former Oriole Brian Mattis at the age of 37. Mattis was found dead Monday in a home in Phoenix. The cause of death has not been reported at this time. The Orioles announced his passing in a statement on Tuesday and said, quote, "A staple in our clubhouse from 2009 to 2016. Brian was beloved throughout Birdland, and his passion for baseball and our community was unmatched. He dedicated his time to connecting with any fan he could, was a cherished teammate, and always had a smile on his face." Mattis was a first-round pick by the Orioles who would later emerge as a part of their pitching staff in 2009. He initially broke into the majors as a starter, but would move to the bullpen and was a key part of the Orioles' playoff runs in 2012 and 2014. All of us here at Orioles on the Verge send our condolences to Mattis's family and close friends, as well as his former teammates on the Orioles. Bob, I know you had a chance to watch him a lot during his career, especially in the major leagues. So I know you had a couple memories you wanted to share.
Yeah, just, when he was drafted, it was in the thick of the long drought of losing baseball for the Orioles, and really thought he was going to be this lefty ace. And unfortunately, that didn't happen, but he did have a really solid major league career. He owned David Ortiz, lefty specialist, and yeah, like Vivek said in the chat, 2012 wildcard game, did a number on Josh Hamilton. So yeah, I think he was also a little bit before his time. I think I think it was Garrett pointed out in the Discord that he had a lot of spin, a lot of extension on his fastball. It was only 91, 92, but it played up. So I think if he would have been a young pitcher in this day and age with the Orioles, he might have fared a little bit better. But yeah, it's really, really sad and unfortunate. And hopefully when the news finally comes out about what happened, it's not even more sad.
And with that, now we'll transition into the main topic of this episode, which is the Orioles signing of Charlie Morton to a 1-year, $15 million contract. Morton has been in the major leagues for a long time now, entering his age 41 season. He has been with Atlanta for the last 4 years, and even though he is getting up there in age, obviously, and his stuff is diminishing a little bit, and the results have dropped off somewhat, he's still a pretty solid pitcher. For Atlanta last year, he threw 165 in the third innings across 30 starts, posting a 4.19 ERA and striking out 167 batters in that span, which is impressive for a guy that doesn't rely on high velocity. We know, though, that with his ceiling at this point, he's probably a solid number 3 or number 4 starter for a contending team, and not the top of the rotation arm that a lot of Orioles fans are still hoping the team will acquire between now and when pitchers and catchers report in a month. So there's a little bit of a challenge here, I think, which is trying to think about what you want the Orioles to do with the rest of their offseason, but then evaluating the Morton signing on its own terms. And I know for me, those are two kind of different feelings. And I want to get into that a little bit tonight. And then we'll also talk about where the Orioles may go from here. But Nick, I'll start with you. What is your thoughts on this move just on the point of signing Charlie Morton?
It is tough to just kind of look at this, take it for face value, I guess, if you will. Like you said, we're going to get into specific scenarios and what ifs in a minute. So, like, trying to keep this just strictly based on what the roster looks like right now. And my initial take on the signing was just like, honestly, I think I was sitting on my couch and open up Twitter, scrolling through. I see the Orioles posted. I'm like, why? Not like this is dumb. I need to post something on social media right now. My instant reaction. I need to get down to the warehouse with my pitchfork. But like, why would they do this? Like, this doesn't mean the roster is set, but more like just like a genuine, what purpose does this signing serve? Why did they feel like they needed to make this move? And just looking at the roster as it stands right now, not looking at possible trades or anything else, but thinking about it like the next day, I was on board with the signing, and really just for one big reason. Excuse me, and that's just like his reliability. Like, he's not the Corbin Burns replacement. He wasn't brought in to raise the ceiling of this rotation. I know everyone wants that move right now. They wanted that move a month ago, but he brings like stability and reliability to a starting rotation that, as it stands right now, has a lot of question marks, I think. And you look at Grayson Rodriguez hasn't proved that he could stay healthy across in the big leagues up to this point. Dean Kramer's had 3 full seasons in the big leagues. I feel like he should be 35 years old, and we talked about his 10th year in the big leagues, but just 3 full seasons. He's only crossed 130 innings once in those 3 seasons. That was back in 2023. We don't know when Kyle Bradish is going to come back. And again, what is he going to give you in 2025? We have no idea how Tomoyuki Sagano is going to transition to pro ball here in the States. Chase McDermott, injury control issues. Cade Povich, yeah, he's poised for year 2 breakout growth, but that's still a big question mark as well. Brandon Young hasn't thrown a single pitch in the big leagues. Just kind of like going through all these guys. Trevor Rogers, we don't know. Promising into last year in AAA, but we just don't know. Albert Suarez, obviously the second half regression. A lot of question marks there. And like you mentioned, Charlie Morton's stability and what he brings, like, it's 6 of the last 7 years, 30 plus starts. Obviously 2020 was the only outlier season. 163 plus innings over those 6 seasons. So, if he's gonna come in and give you 160 innings with like a 4.5 ERA, I know a lot of fans probably don't want to hear that, but I think on a 1 year, $15 million deal, you're pretty happy about that. And that's what it is. It's like a bridge as we help, get some more of these guys, Bradish, Wells, and some other guys healthy. You get these guys healthy, and some of these younger arms answer some more questions. Hopefully, fingers crossed, Charlie Morton's just kind of there to cruise along.
Yeah, I got to admit, and again, credit to Mike Elias in the front office for blindsiding us, even when we're trying to predict the blindside that's coming, because I'm like, Charlie Morton, I thought he was retiring. Is he still playing baseball? Oh, we signed him. Cool. Again, kind of like, why? Again, just same reaction as Nick had. And it took a minute, but I think I understand the move now after being able to process it. And again, even when I was not loving the move right away, I do understand that for a 1 year deal, 15. I mean, people are complaining. You're spending $15 million on Charlie Morton. Who cares? It's 1 year. 1 year money on 1 year deals literally does not matter at all. But yeah, he's 41. He's been consistent, and now the Orioles, I feel like, go 10 deep right now, even without another move. And for a team coming off a season where they had a bunch of injuries to the starting pitching, I think we see that they do not want to have that happen again. And yeah, a lot of it is middle of the rotation trending towards bottom of the rotation guys. A couple potential top of the rotation guys with Rodriguez and Eflin if they can be consistent and healthy. But the floor is now been, again, we've talked about raise the floor in the past when it comes to the minor leagues, but I feel like the starting rotation now, the floor is pretty high when you have Rodriguez, Eflin, Kramer, Morton, Sugano, Povich, Rogers, McDermott, Brandon Young, Albert Suarez, even Thad Ward down there in AAA. But yeah, I think there's something in the works that's going to come from this, and this gives some security where they could go out and trade for an ace or a young. I like Dan Sanchez today on Blue Sky was saying his prediction is now that the Orioles are going to go after a guy with a younger starting pitcher who's established in the majors with years of control left, and they want to supplant that with some veterans around them, so that you're not relying too much on a young staff. I would like to see that as well. Shane Baz, been talking about you a lot. I still like that option, but it's going to be interesting at the end of the season in 2025. Well, that's this year, to look at Charlie Morton, end of year stats, Justin Verlander, who just signed with the San Francisco Giants for an identical 1 year, $15 million deal, and Max Scherzer whenever he eventually signs. Steamer projects Charlie Morton 156 innings with a 4.16 ERA. They predict Justin Verlander with a 130 innings with a 4.25 ERA, and Max Scherzer with a 137 amount of innings at a 3.97 ERA. So, I mean, if you were okay with signing a Verlander or a Scherzer for a year, you should have no problem signing Charlie Morton for a year either.
At the end of last season, I had made the point that I think one of the failings of the 2024 Orioles was that the front office, and they couldn't have anticipated the extent of the injuries that they had, but that if they had an offseason that focused a little bit more on depth, some of these issues could have been mitigated. And at the time, I said that you might not have thought it when Kyle Gibson signed with the Cardinals before the 2024 season that the Orioles were going to miss him. But there were a lot of points last year where the Orioles could have used Kyle Gibson. And I kind of view Morton as the guy that helps make up for that, that now you can slot Morton into your rotation anywhere in the 3 to 5 range. You know you're going to get 160, 165 innings. The ERA is going to be somewhere in the 4s, but he's going to take the ball every 5 days, and he's going to give you a chance to win. It's going to be very no frills, but you need that. This team needs that right now because you do have so many question marks that both of you have pointed out. And when you look at the data with Charlie Morton, what does stand out is that the fastball is not that good at this point. Still a decent velocity, but the pitch itself doesn't really generate swings and misses the way I think you'd like to see. Normally, I might be a little bit concerned about that, but Charlie Morton has never been a pitcher that overpowers people. This has kind of been his MO for years, has been to get by without a plus fastball. And it's worked for him up to this point. I don't see any reason why it's going to stop working now. And I'll get into these scenarios that I gave you guys in advance of this show and kind of taking a guess of where the Orioles go from here. And we can go, actually, I'll just throw all three out about how the rest of the offseason is going to go with the starting rotation. The first scenario is the one that I think most Orioles fans don't want, but one that we have to acknowledge as a possibility, which is that they are finished. They're going to stand pat and go with this group, likely a 5-man rotation of Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Charlie Morton, Dean Kramer, and Sugano. That doesn't mean that they're not going to acquire a starter sometime before the deadline, nor does it mean that Tyler Wells or Kyle Bradis aren't going to come back at some point this year and be effective contributors for them. But for the here and now, this is the starting staff. The second scenario, and I admittedly find this one the most intriguing, and I'm not sure it's my favorite, but I think it's the most intriguing. With Morton in place, they now have the flexibility to move a starter towards the back end of their rotation to go get a top-of-the-line arm. This allows them to not dip into their prospect pool as much, and it may appeal to a team like the Padres, like the Astros, like the Mariners, that's going to move one of their top starters or their top starter, but still have an eye towards competing this year. And at that point, Dean Kramer, with 3 years of team control left and a proven track record at this point of being at least a reliable 4 or 5 for a contending team, is a nice trade chip to throw in there. You add in that the Orioles take on some money in the contract, and they probably don't have to give up a ton of prospect depth. Of course, so that leaves them with one less starter. So your rotation now is your new number one, followed by Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Charlie Morton, and then Sagano. Then there's the fifth scenario, or the third scenario. They go out and they sign Zach Flaherty, or they trade for the top of the rotation arm with a package that is centered around prospects. That means they keep the current group of starters, and that gives them essentially 7, maybe 8 starters on the roster, depending on what happens with Cade Povich. And while your 5-man rotation at that point is probably your new top of the rotation arm, Eflin, Rodriguez, Morton, and then Kramer or Sagano in the last spot, the Orioles could now go to a 6-man rotation if they chose to do so for the whole year or parts of the whole season. And the reason that I throw that out is I was surprised when I looked at their schedule this week, and it was the first time I really sat down and looked at it other than they open in Toronto, they open at home on this date. They don't have an off day for the first 2 weeks of the season, which is really unusual. You're used to seeing a lot of off days in April. Now, I think they have 3 off days in 10 days after that stretch. But for the first 2 weeks of the season, barring a postponement in Baltimore, Boston, or Kansas City, they're playing straight through. So maybe there's a case for having a 6-man rotation initially that shouldn't shape your plans for the whole offseason, but it is kind of an added bonus if you can plan for the first couple weeks of the year knowing, hey, we've got 7 starters in case someone's a little slow at coming out of camp or someone unexpectedly gets hurt in spring training. So just considering those 3 scenarios, what do you guys want to happen, and then what do you think will happen?
I personally think there's a trade in the works, and while you can't force a trade, you have to. The other team has to agree to it. There has to be, mutual interest there. So I think bare minimum, even if this is the 5 we go into the season with, and they don't make that trade until the trade deadline, it's not the end of the world. Like I said, you have depth. You're going to at least be in every game, you would imagine, day in and day out, unless someone just has not their best stuff that day. But you have a competent starting pitcher on the mound every game, even without an upgrade. But obviously, we wouldn't be thrilled about that. We would be disappointed for sure. At least I would. And yeah, I just think that this gives the Orioles some options and a justifiable reason to say no to an offer where it's like, no, we don't have to take this offer because we have 5 starters, 6 starters, 7 starters right now as it is. So sorry, come back to us if you want to do it. They gives them a little bit more leverage, I feel like. And like I saw someone, I don't even know where it was, say that maybe the order of operations is a little bit different. It's going to throw fans off, but just pretend they traded for a guy first and then signed Charlie Morton afterwards. Then it would make a lot more sense. So let's give it time to see the complete picture. I would love to trade Dean Kramer and one of the Ryans at first base for that starting pitcher, whether it's Luis Castillo of the Mariners or one of the other more exciting names, whether it's a rental or someone with control. That's what I would love to see. And honestly, I think that is what's going to happen, but you can't guarantee it. So we'll see. Once February 1st gets here and we don't have a 2025's version of Corbin Burns, then we'll reevaluate.
Sweet order of operations. I don't know why my first thought was Michael Elias just doesn't believe in PIMDAS. Was it PIMDAS? Whatever it was, you learn in geometry or whatever it is, middle school, parentheses, exponents. I don't know. My wife's the data analyst. I was the history major, so I didn't deal with numbers. If they stand pat, obviously I'd not be happy about that one. I just, again, very concerned about what Brash is going to bring. I applaud those who are optimistic about what he's going to give you at the end of the year, but like to sit back and be like, this rotation, the depth that we have is good enough to get us to when Kyle Brash is healthy. Then he's going to come back. That's going to be a big addition. Don't trust that. I also don't want to just sit back and say, oh, they'll figure this out at the deadline, because you have no clue who's going to be available at the deadline. You don't know who the buyers or sellers are going to be, what injuries are going to manifest. Like, competition goes up, prices go up. You could easily be, the SpongeBob meme, staring at everybody outside having fun while you're inside sad. So I obviously don't like that. I don't think anybody would. I also agree that I like the second option because I don't want to assume that the trade is in the works just because Charlie Morton was brought in, like Bob mentioned, the reverse order of operations here, because this organization has done nothing that I've assumed they would do this offseason. But I would absolutely love that because this is a way where you don't want to keep trading for rentals. I get that, depleting the farm. Still a deep farm system. Is it as strong as it was, 2 years ago? Maybe not, but still, eventually you want to get a guy in who's got multiple years of control. You want to be able to extend somebody and have them here for the long haul and not keep going over this process year after year. But bringing in Charlie Morton and that quality depth this rotation does have right now, like one of the big roadblocks in previous trades, I feel like, especially at last year's deadline, was when you talk about the Orioles being in conversation with, the White Sox, whoever it was. I feel like a lot of the conversation was, well, the Orioles don't have like major league ready pitching, and the team, the seller, wants major league ready pitching. Well, now the Orioles have that. They have a good amount of that. Like Kramer, the Orioles could be aggressively trying to shop Kramer as well. Like, if with the new wall, maybe their model is showing some massive regression coming Dean Kramer's way next year. And you're like, hey, we want to try to move this guy. He's a veteran, though. He could be very valuable for a team in a good pitcher's ballpark. Povich flashed last year. If a team is super high on Cade Povich and they want him, you feel comfortable moving on from him. Chase McDermott's close. Like, they've got that depth now that they can move on from. You've got the draft pick, so many early draft picks, but you've got at least one that you're going to be able to trade. Like, you can move that. And it lowers. You've got this burgeoning also international prospect capital as well. And we know teams are already calling about, Emilio Sanchez and Elvin Garcia and these high ceiling international prospects. I would love to be able to move, a Kramer or one of these depth or rotation option pieces, maybe package a couple of high flyer international prospects, maybe send in the draft pick. And that you're really lowering the prospect capital you have to move for a top line starter. But yeah, again, the trades have to match up. And I don't buy any report that so-and-so is off the market. Like I'm not believing like Framber Valdez off the market. Astros probably not trading him. I don't believe that for a single second. Every single organization is going to be looking to upgrade, and hopefully the Orioles are aggressively pursuing some of these targets. And any team with any available starter, when the right call comes, like they're going to take it, no matter what they've said publicly over this winter.
Yeah, and honestly, even Albert Suarez might be of interest to a team or two. I don't know. Like, he's older, yeah, and it was like, is this a one-hit wonder type of thing? But he was successful when he was out there, and I don't know, Zach, if we have time for me to go through the couple of trades that I put through on baseballtradevalues.com, our favorite website that should sponsor us. But I did put in some options there for a couple trades after the signing happened because it got my wheels spinning.
Yeah, go ahead and run through those, and then I'll give my thoughts on these scenarios. But I want to hear some of your hypothetical trades. It might happen.
Yeah. So Shane Baz, this was the most recent one. I think it was in MLB Trade Rumors chat or something that said after they extended Drew Rasmussen, they wouldn't be surprised if they try to trade a Taj Bradley or Shane Baz, and maybe a deal around Heston Kjerstad could work. That got me thinking, and the BTV says Heston Kjerstad, Chase McDermott, Dylan Beavers. That will get it done for Shane Baz, around 40 value. I think I would do that for 4 years of control for him, Shane Baz. And I do prefer Shane Baz to Taj Bradley. Don't know what you guys think, but Zach Gallen, the guy we called our shot on in 2024, at the end of 2024, we could get him and Kevin Ginkel, a solid relief pitcher, 31 years old, 2 years of control left, for Dean Kramer, Ryan Mountcastle, and Chase McDermott. We could apparently get Pablo Lopez, 3 years of control left, for Heston Kjerstad, Dean Kramer, and Chase McDermott. Again, you're going to notice a lot of similar names in these offers just because that's how the values fell. We could get Sandy Alcantara from the Marlins, apparently, for Heston Kjerstad, Cade Povich, and Dylan Beavers. From the Padres for the rental of Dylan Cease, and this one I think makes a lot of sense. Dean Kramer and Heston Kjerstad for Dylan Cease. While it's a rental, that is probably the best 1 year rental you could find for an ace. And then I think I didn't do the numbers on Luis Castillo because I know they have him as a negative value with his contract, but I would imagine a Dean Kramer and one of the Ryans could probably get that done.
I just keep going back to the Padres, and because this makes so much sense, it's not going to happen. So I don't even know why I'm bothering talking right now. But like also with the Padres, that trade makes a ton of sense because that fills a big hole the Padres have. They need an outfielder. Kerstad would play very well in that lineup, but you also they just took AJ Preller just took Juan Nunez in the Rule 5 draft. Who knows what this guy has an infatuation with 17-year-old Dominican kids? Like who knows what AJ Preller would take to get Cease. I was really hoping that this Sasaki stuff would just finally end and he would just sign. And I hope it's the Padres because I feel like
mystery team though. There's apparently a mystery team.
Yeah, I'm not getting my hopes up. But I've been hoping he goes to the Padres just because I wonder if that helps the situation where, maybe they say, all right, we've got Sasaki. Yeah, we'll take Kramer. And then, maybe you don't have to move Kerstad. Maybe we can, again, move some of these international guys, younger, higher ceiling international guys, or maybe they value someone just insanely high that we're not even thinking of. Because again, this is AJ Preller. He's a wild card. I'm fascinated by that route, I think, at this point.
Yeah, I could almost see AJ Preller placing a higher value on Keeler Morphe than I could Heston Kjerstad.
Yeah, that's fair. That is completely fair. And honestly, the longer Anthony Santander, I keep saying it, but the longer he's out there, the more I'm like, maybe it's not impossible he comes back. Or I saw something about James Outman being shopped today by the Dodgers. Maybe that could be a Heston Kjerstad replacement if you lose him in a trade. But Zach, I want to hear your thoughts.
So as we sit here, I think that the scenario that I think is most realistic is the second one, which is that they're going to shop one of the starters that would pitch towards the back part of their rotation to get the top of the rotation arm. I think their preference would be to move Dean Kramer for the reasons that you brought up, Bob, at the wall moving in, maybe the model is showing some regression, but it's also on the table that if a team like the Marlins, who I don't know what the Marlins are going to do for the rest of this decade, doesn't value Kramer that highly, but they like Cade Povich and more years of control and the lower cost for now, that Povich is on the table in the deal with the Marlins, or Chase McDermott's on the table at that point. I think Kramer makes a ton of sense for the Mariners. I think he makes a ton of sense for the Padres. And I even think he makes a ton of sense for the Twins because I sense with Minnesota the Pablo Lopez speculation is more about the contract, which I think is a perfectly reasonable deal for Lopez. I have no reservations about the money at all. I think it's more about the contract than them wanting to do a full teardown. So you get 3 years of Dean Kramer. That gives you something to work with if you think that in 2026 you could be back in the playoff chase. Or even you think if certain things break your way, you're a wild card team in 2025. So I think Kramer does fit into a lot of cases. I would not rule out the third scenario, though. And the reason I say that is that if you look at the teams that make a push for the playoffs every year, the Dodgers are the poster child for this. It feels like the Dodgers have more starters than there are roster spots typically allocated for pitchers. They're the poster child of this. But Cleveland does a very good job of it. Milwaukee does a really good job of it. Someone gets hurt and it's just the next man up and they find a way to make it work. And I sort of sense that might be the next frontier for the Orioles is we now know how to put together a competent 1 through 5, but we need to get better at what is our 1 through 8 in case 3 of those 5 get hurt, which is what happened last year.
Yeah, they're getting there. Honestly, like we're starting to see that this year. You traded a couple of pretty big pitching prospect pieces last year's deadline, but these guys are bubbling up, and I think they are. And yeah, that point, I feel like that's one of the points that stood out to me. Go back, a year plus ago? It's been 2 years maybe by now, when Eve Rosenbaum was on the show, and you guys interviewed her, and she specifically, I remember her talking about the depth and how critical that was, and she highlighted, I feel like more than once that time. The Orioles are getting there though in that aspect. But yeah, you know what? My fun answer is, again, sign Jack Flaherty and watch it all burn down. That's the sick and twisted side of me, which is just like normal everyday me. That's what I want to see, if I'm being completely honest. But I don't know. Well, again, we don't know what's going to happen. There's still
really
5-6 weeks, and it's just, I feel like we're just like going in circles, and just every week we're like, oh, what about this guy? But I don't think they're not done. That's all I know is they're not done.
I do love that fans are like, don't have enough pitching. How are you going to replace Burns? They're scared to spend money. Meanwhile, the Orioles have spent like the 6th or 7th most amount of money in the majors and free agency, but they sign a pitcher. Oh, not him. No, why would you spend that money on him? It is kind of a funny dichotomy there.
It's almost like they're not trying to win.
Yeah. What was the award that we give away every year? We have a front runner for 2025.
Gotta win those. Gotta stack those AAA championships. Mike's only got one. He wants to hang multiple banners down there at Harbor Park, right? Come on.
And with that, before we say anything else, that does it for this week. So we will be back later this week to take a look at minor league rosters, and we're going to go from AAA down to the FCL and project how their rosters are going to look on their respective opening days and tell you which teams you should be the most excited to watch. Really, the answer is all of them, but we're going to let you know on the night when they're all playing which one you should prioritize. That'll be on later this week on Orioles on the Verge. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around, be sure to head over to our Patreon community and sign up today to become a member. We are in the midst of our top 50 prospects countdown now. As we record this episode, we're in the low 40s, so we're still very, very early into the countdown. Plenty of time to jump on. If you get in now, you're going to hear most of it. You'll be able to go back and access the episodes we have already posted. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by BetOnline and part of the Believe Podcast Network. Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to take an early look at the 2025 minor league season with our annual projected rosters. Bob put them together for us over at our Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. You can head there to check out the full article, but tonight's episode is going to give a little bit more commentary on that list as we go from Norfolk down to the FCL to preview what their rosters are going to look like in 2025. And that will be on tonight's episode of Orioles on the Verge, which is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, to NHL and UFC, BetOnline is the number one sports betting source for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. An annual tradition here at Orioles on the Verge, and something you're familiar with if you're a longtime listener, but if you're not, we're glad that you're joining us for this, is to preview the minor league rosters for the upcoming season early in the new year. In fact, it's usually either our first or second episode of the new year, as is the case here in 2025. Over at our Substack, Bob has written up projected rosters for all four of the Orioles' full season affiliates, plus the FCL squad. And Bob, just to kind of give us a little bit of taste before we get into specific rosters, you go pretty deep. You get into not only the starting lineup, but also the starting rotation, the bullpen, and the bench, and you have what you call a watchability rating for each team. Can you explain to us what that means?
Not really. It's a gut feel. No, it's one of my favorite exercises to do in the off season, just because it's kind of, again, it's the new year. We can finally get excited for the new season coming up. Spring training's like a month and a half away. All right, let's really get into this and start to get excited. And I have a general idea of who's going to be on what team by the end of last season, but putting this together, it's like, oh wow, this team not quite as exciting as I would have thought, or wow, Aberdeen, they are loaded and they will be all season long. Not to give anything away, but yeah, watchability rating, it's just like it's completely subjective, but it's just out of 10. I think how much fun if you're opening up the MILB TV app or going to the affiliates page on MLB.com or on MLB TV. What's the likelihood that you're going to want to tune into this team over this team, and do you want to just be there for Norfolk's top of the lineup and then switch over to Aberdeen after that? Something like that. But I will say that it is fun to see how AAA has gone from not very watchable to incredibly watchable to coming back down again. It's definitely got its ebbs and flows for most of the teams.
Well, let's start there in AAA because they have the guy that, for right now, seems to be emerging as the consensus top prospect in this system and one of the top prospects in all of baseball, Samuel Basallo, anchoring their lineup. Bob has him penciled in the third spot of the order, everyday catcher, just about what we'd expect. Judd Fabian and Dylan Beavers also will get their first extended taste of AAA in 2025. But then after that, it's a lot of familiar names, a lot of older names in the lineup and not necessarily skewing towards top prospects. When you get into the rotation, Bob has Chase McDermott and Brandon Young starting out in Norfolk's rotation, along with Trevor Rogers, Thad Ward, Alex Pham, and Kyle Bronovich. So Pham and Bronovich making the jump up from Bowie. The bench and the bullpen in particular, the bullpen actually in Norfolk looks very good. The bench looks pretty solid as well. So, Nick, I'll start with you here. I know that Basallo is the name that we're going to be watching the most, perhaps, of any prospect going into next season. But what are your thoughts on this Norfolk squad as a whole?
The projected lineup here is definitely top heavy, but like Bob said, it's still a more fun lineup compared to the days of like cleanup hitter Zach Vinci, Chris Bostic, Mason Williams making up 80% of this offense down in Norfolk. But those three big talents: Fabian, Beavers, and Basallo. Like those three guys in the lineup alone, those are three guys you're going to want to watch. Assuming they all start in AAA, which I think is a pretty safe assumption there. Fabian only had 30 games in AAA last year, and like they weren't good offensively. Like the numbers just were not good at all. Basallo only had 20 something games there as a teenager, and then Beavers only had 6 games, so he barely got his feet wet. I'm just excited to get that extended look at all three of those guys in particular. Like, does Fabian start to bang on the doors of Camden Yards by the end of the year? Like, what does Basallo look like across a full season? Still is what, a 20-year-old, not even 21-year-old yet in AAA. What does Dylan Beavers look like? Does his bat take the next step forward? Hopefully it's more consistent power, a little bit tougher to kind of showcase that power. I feel like, especially for lefties, a lot of nights you have, that pretty strong, steady breeze coming in off the Elizabeth River. So it can be tough most nights for lefties to get a home run down there at Harbor Park. But do we see more consistent power from Dylan Beavers? I feel like he came out of the gates hot and then just went ice cold as far as home runs are concerned, and then trickled a few more there at the end of the season. But I'm excited to see what that bat turns into this year. The rotation, though, this is what's going to make me take more trips back to the homeland and the ballpark that curated my love for the sport of baseball. You could also potentially even throw Cade Povich into this rotation based on our last conversation. And if so, that's even more unbelievable and speaks to the depth. But take Cade Povich out, let's assume he's in the major leagues. You still got Young and McDermott. Those are 40-man guys who need big seasons. I'm very anxious, I think is the word, about Trevor Rogers. I want to see what he's got built off last year. I think it was Andy Koska that wrote that article in the Banner about what he's doing, the offseason work and the stuff with his back. I'm cautiously optimistic about Trevor Rogers. I want to see what he looks like. But like Alex Pham, he's going to get his biggest test yet. I really want to see what he looks like in AAA with that big league ball. And even like Zach mentioned the bullpen there. If you got these guys like Rodolfo Martinez, Robinson Martinez, all the Martinezes in Norfolk, Gerald Agondo, these guys do like 100+ mile per hour gas. And yeah, they're older. They were signed out of Mexico, most of them, but that's a good, potentially like really fun rotation in Norfolk. And even, did I miss something? I feel like I missed somebody here. I'll talk about those guys later. But yeah, Norfolk. It's not an elite potential roster, but still one that you're going to want to tune in most nights.
Yeah, it's because of the starting pitching. Honestly, just the pitching in general, because my guy, Luis Gonzalez, is there in the bullpen. Cade Stroud, both of these guys are on the 40-man roster now, so they could come up and help. So you can pay a little bit more attention to them when they're in the game. And yeah, all these minor league signings, I don't really know. I mean, maybe some of them will start in Double-A. I didn't really know what to do with them, so I just lumped them all here. But I even have Peter Van Loon in the bullpen for Norfolk, who, if you're following along the top 50, we just talked about him on the daily. Sign up for the Patreon. Matt Bowman is there, Dylan Hyde, Keegan Gillies. I think the pitching is where it's at in AAA, and then hopefully the top three in that lineup can do some damage and get the team some wins. And I'm not even sure there's too much help on the way throughout the season from AA Bowie, but we'll get to that in a minute. I do like some of the veterans, minor leaguers that the Orioles have signed. I wonder if Jordan Adams, if, career angel, not really doing him any favors to develop there. So maybe the Orioles can unlock something there, or maybe he's just going to be who was it, Peyton Burdick early last year. They got some run. Franklin Barreto, I like to see what he could do after, I think, where was he? Was he in Mexico too? Some of these guys, and what's the last one? Blake Hunt, now that Rene Pinto is out of the organization, he's like that third catcher that could get some major league time this year. Not that I'm really care to watch him, but it is something.
We'll go down to Double-A Chesapeake because I have to get used to saying that now.
Go
ahead.
I got two wild cards here. I didn't mention these. I just wanted to highlight real quick. You mentioned Peter Van Loon and how we just talked about him on the top 50 episode today. If you're a patron, I'm pretty stoked to see his AAA data now that we get, the good StatCast data on him. I'm very anxious to see what he can do because he started the year very late, but when he got to AA, he dominated. And so I really want to see what he's going to look like. I imagine he probably is like, a piggyback role. I'm sure as they do all up and down the system. But I jokingly, but not jokingly, made this comment in Discord this morning. But Raul Alcantara, minor league pickup they got from the Mariners, like this is a lefty who throws 98 miles per hour and had like a 50% ground ball rate in AA last year when they converted him to the bullpen. I really want to see what he does because he had a little bit of issues throwing strikes there, but I don't know. I have a thing for lefties who throw 98 miles per hour. Call me weird, but like that's super intriguing. One of these guys just got a ton of tools. Can he put it together in the Orioles organization with fresh eyes looking at him?
And in all honesty, this is what I think this front office does as good as any team out there. Is you don't need to sign a Tanner Scott for whatever 4 years, $60 million or whatever he's asking for. You don't need to spend on the bullpen when you can develop relief pitchers, even when they're older. Look, Albert Suarez last year, Luis Gonzalez, even though he didn't crack the majors, look at what he did last year with the Orioles in AAA. And they're going to find these diamonds in the rough. I'd much rather let Mike Elias cook and find the next Danny Coulomb instead of like signing some expensive reliever when we could I don't care if they spend the money, but just as far as like resources go, I like seeing these random relievers come up and pop and stick around like Yunier Cano.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I'm curious about Van Loon too, having done that breakdown over at Patreon. Van Loon, and this is something I know we'll get into more in another episode, probably closer to the season. Not a guy who throws particularly hard, but I would love to know what the spin on that fastball is and how hitters are or aren't squaring up on it, because all of his numbers went in a positive direction at Bowie last year. And Bowie, by the way, now Chesapeake. And looking at the Bay Sox roster, Bob has the watchability rating at a 7 and Norfolk at a 7.5. And I agree with Bob's opinion of the lineup, which is that the two main guys are Enrique Bradfield Jr. and Creed Willems. And chances are that your interest in following the hitters there is going to drop off once you get past those two guys. But yet I also couldn't help but look and feel like it might be the ultimate example of a boom or bust lineup because there are so many prospects in here who you're banking on either some sort of bounce back from an inconsistent year in the case of Frederick Ben Cosme, or hopefully making a return from injury in Tavian Josenberger, Reed Trimble, and Max Wagner. Josenberger looked like he was well on his way to breaking out before having an injury shortly after getting promoted to Double-A last year. Trimble has dealt with injuries off and on since being drafted in 2021. And after a fairly promising debut in 2023, Wagner lost a lot of time to injury last year. And when he was on the field, did not look particularly comfortable in the box. The bench here is loaded with catchers and Carter Young, which is kind of interesting how it's going to pan out. But when you consider the positional flexibility of some of the players on this roster, such as Colin Burns and Ryan Higgins, and either Connor Pavloni to an extent, it kind of makes sense that you could fit 3 catchers in this group. Bowie's starting rotation, though, for my money, is very, very exciting when you consider the possibility of Cameron Weston, Patrick Riley, Edgar Portes, Zach Fruit, Trace Bright, and Brian Long, 6 righties with varying degrees of upside. And in Weston and Portes in particular, 2 guys that really rose up the rankings last year. Riley feels like a guy who might be poised for a breakout. And then much like with Norfolk, I think Bowie has a pretty strong bullpen on paper at this point. Now, before I turn this over to you guys, I just want to bring this point up for anyone that's wondering why Cameron Weston is in Double-A after the year that he had last year, where he was statistically either the first or second best pitcher, depending on what numbers you want to use in the whole minor leagues. And he spent most of that year at Bowie. Someone, probably a couple of pitchers every year, have a statistical case for making promotion to AAA, yet they get held back in Double-A, mostly because of depth or because the Orioles want to give them a little bit more time there before moving them up to AAA. That's going to have to be someone this year. And for right now, Bob has that forecasted to be Weston. But curious to get your guys' thoughts starting with the lineup. It does feel like there's a degree of volatility here.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I like a lot of these guys, a lot as prospects even. But outside of, like I wrote in the thing, Bradfield, who obviously first round pick, potentially, hopefully future center fielder of the future for the Orioles, I don't see a ton of upside. I think Reed Trimble and Tavian Josenberger and even Creed Willems to an extent could get there, but I think they still have a ways to go. And then I think Max Wagner, Ben Cosme, Douglas Hodo, they're like potential bench pieces, role players, which is not bad at all when you talk about depth. But when you have Colin Burns relying on him day in and day out, the lineup can't be that great. I don't care how many pull downs you can do. So it's, Ryan Higgins, he's never really taken off here. I think the bench is really solid. Like you said, there's a million catchers. I didn't know what to do with the bench here, but Carter Young, he did come along as the season went on last year. So maybe he can break out too. Like, I do think there's some breakout candidates. I just am not counting on them necessarily.
Yeah, I also just keep thinking whenever we do this episode, how many times people are like, these are the official rosters. But yeah, Bradfield's a star here, and like, not a hot take. I'm not going out on a limb because he was a first round draft pick out of a college powerhouse in Vanderbilt, but I am becoming much more bullish on Bradfield. I will say that Trimble, like, just for the love of God, stay healthy, man. He had 50 game stretch there in Aberdeen last year where he was very, very good. It was like a
Electric.
130 something, WRC plus. And then as soon as he gets promoted to Bowie, we're like, all right, we're cooking now. I think it was a hamstring injury. It was just like, come on, man. He's still young though. I give him one more shot in Bowie. Let's see what he can do. I just recorded the top 50 episode on Max Wagner this morning. Become a patron, get access to all 50 episodes. 2024, in that awkward period there, that was just a wash. The offseason, he had made bone surgery. Then he gets the back injury. So he only played in, I think it was 25 total games. That included rehab appearances. Give him one more shot as well. Let's see what he's got. As far as the lineup is concerned, Tavian Josenberger is my guy here, though. He gets very little love. I'm not saying he's a future top 100 prospect or like a guy who's going to battle Enrique Bradfield Jr. for the starting center field job in Baltimore, but he was a 3rd-round pick out of Arkansas. He's got speed, defense, sneaky power. I think the plan, I've said this before, was to play him at second base more so in Aberdeen, but injuries and craziness, I don't think that they were able to stick to that plan, and he played more outfield, but he walks a lot. He doesn't strike out that much. He had 50 stolen bases between 2 levels, above average WRC plus. I think he could be like a super utility type guy looking down the road. Other than the obvious guys in Bradfield and Trimble, or Bradfield and Creed Willems and such, Tavian Josenberg, as far as the lineup is concerned, I think is a wild card here that could have a real breakout in 2025.
Yeah, with the rotation, as we spin into the pitchers here, in my first pass, my first rough draft of this exercise, I had Cameron Weston and Trey Sprite in AAA, but then I remembered the Orioles signed Thad Ward, and that just made a lot of sense. That pushed one of them down, and then Kyle Branovich, I can't imagine. Like I said in the Discord, I'm honestly surprised he's even in the organization still, but I can't see them leaving him down in AA again. So had to put him in AAA for now. But these guys, look, whether it's trades or injuries causing guys to get caught up to the majors and help out, these guys are going to get their time in AAA, especially Weston and Bright when it comes to that. Maybe some other guys too. Pat Riley, I mean, love that trade still. Think it's a sleeper, sneaky, awesome trade they made, getting Billy Cook, who turns out we probably could have used down the stretch in the major leagues. But hey, there's no way to know that ahead of time. Still like Billy Cook a lot, but Pat Riley, we talk about how deep the top end of the pitching prospects are, but he's right in the mix. He's right there as one of those guys that could end up being a mid-rotation starter down the line if all goes well. You also got Zach Fruit, super exciting, hard-throwing right-handed pitcher, and Edgar Portes, who continues to be underrated by Orioles fans. And, I mean, not the biggest name, wasn't a big signing, not a lot said about him outside of this podcast, but he is a potential stud in the making. And, yeah, the bullpen's pretty solid. Daniel Lloyd coming back another year from injury. I know they liked him a couple years ago. Kyle Verbitsky, I think if he's strictly a reliever, I think he does have a little bit of upside. So Daryl Hernai's trade, still a little bit of hope left in that deal. And Yaki Rivera, talk about a trade. Who would have thought the player to be named later from the Cole Saucer Tanner Scott trade to the Marlins would be the guy that we're hanging our hat on for that trade to work out. Obviously, you do process over results. I think it was a good trade either way, but Yaki Rivera, pretty exciting reliever who's only like 21 years old in AA. So yeah, look, even a 7 out of 10, that's pretty watchable for me. So
Yaki Rivera got that dog in him. That guy's on another level. I think when you look at this pitch stuff too, also like there's some stuff plus gods in this rotation. Like, will it translate to actual results? TBD. But like Edgar Portes and Ryan Long are both had some of the top stuff plus in minor league baseball. They're one of the tops in their specific age groups. Baseball America did that article, I think, right after the season ended. Their stuff plus is off the charts. Edgar Portes is the one guy, though, that I'll say this again. I just keep envisioning him as part of a trade because he was Rule 5 eligible this year. He's going to be Rule 5 eligible again next year, obviously. Can he make that big jump? TBD. But Edgar Portes could be a guy who is a big trade piece, I think, at some point this year. We'll see how that shakes out, but still. But yeah, I want to see Cameron Weston and Pat Riley unleashed. Like, I know that pitching logjam is very real. There's also, if we go back to the Charlie Morton talk, one thing that I forgot to mention in there is that we're all waiting for that Mike Elias press conference where he announces that 8 guys are on life support in a hospital somewhere. Well, also in the minor leagues, it goes like vastly underreported. I feel like last year at one point, there were like 15 pitchers were put on the 60-day IL with no news of what happened. Maybe you find a random Instagram post of a guy laid up in a hospital bed with his arm completely wrapped up. But like a lot of pitchers, I imagine, are probably going to start the year on the IL. So these guys could probably get their shot. But right now, yeah, there is a big logjam. And I do want to see Weston and Pat Riley unleashed, let them really work. Weston, I feel like he probably thinks he probably knows that he can work as a starter, and maybe he does have a path to be a starter at the next level. But that delivery, his stuff, that ground ball rate, like I feel like Cameron Weston could eat out of the bullpen. And if he's going to be Rule 5 eligible this offseason, that's his path here in Baltimore. The other name I will say is I'm just going to mention the name again. Zane Barnhart. I don't know why. I'm going to keep throwing it out there. Either I'm going to look like an idiot or I'm going to be like, called it.
Barn doors are open.
I didn't watch him at all last year. I realized like I didn't watch him at all last year. Didn't really pay much attention. And then read some articles, read some interviews. I like this kid. Decent Arizona Fall League. They really didn't pitch him a whole lot in the Arizona Fall League, but I just keep gravitating towards him. High quality stuff. Made some adjustments last year. I think the plan was to make even more adjustments. Strictly a relief pitching prospect, but yeah, when you're talking about pitchers though, please, Chesapeake, please get a camera. Please bring us back the center field camera with better quality because you're going to have some arms roll through this. We will fundraise for you if you need to. You're going to see some arms rolling through Bowie, especially as the year progresses. Yeah, second half especially. You got some time. But please give us that camera because you're going to be watching Bowie every single night for the arm that takes the bump.
Real quick, one last thing. Every time I see or hear Ryan Long's name, all I think about is when he got in that one spring training game this past season and was like pumping 98, 99. And I was like, oh, Ryan Long this year. And then he kind of had a typical Ryan Long season, but stuff is there if he can unlock it.
I was getting ready to say, Chesapeake, just tell us how much new merch we need to buy, and we'll be on it. We'll get our patrons on it. We'll make sure the center field camera happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'm waiting for the season to get closer before I get some of mine because I do love that new logo.
We'll go down to Aberdeen now, and this might be, I don't think I'm exaggerating here, this might be the most high-ceiling group of any roster in the whole farm system. The lineup is loaded with 2024 draft picks, headlined by first-rounder Vance Honeycutt, but you also have Austin O'Verne, Griff O'Farrell, Ethan Anderson, and Ryan Stafford in that mix. And then you round it out with some of the more intriguing young prospects to come out of the international signing classes of the last few years, including Thomas Sosa, Aaron Estrada, and Leandro Arias. Then you have the tool set himself, Jake Cunningham in right field. Everything we just said a few minutes ago about Reed Trimble and Max Wagner and Tavian Josenberger about health, I think that applies a bit here to Jake Cunningham for reasons we'll probably get into in a few minutes. They're backed by a very, very, for what my money is, a pretty strong bench. And then you get into the rotation, and there is a lot of helium in this group. Luis De Leon, Michael Ferret, Nestor Herman, Trey Gibson would all go back to Aberdeen after pretty successful runs there last year, owing again more to age and the depth in front of them than their performances. I think all of those guys probably could and will crack Bowie Chesapeake at some point in 2025. And then rounding out the starting rotation, Chase Alsop, a 2024 draft pick, and then Braxton Bragg, who was one of the best second half breakout stories in all of the minor leagues for the Orioles last year. And the bullpen. Again, this looks like a really good group, headlined by hopefully a returning Teddy Sharkey from injury, but then you throw in Preston Johnson, Levi Wells, Riley Cooper, Blake Money, who were both pretty good as starters for Delmarva last year, Davey Cruz, Evan Yates, Ty Weatherly, Levi Wells. This is a really, really good group, top to bottom in Aberdeen. So do we feel 2022 Ironbirds vibes here? Just the high ceiling team that has a lot of prospects and runs the table?
Yeah, I think this was almost a 10 out of 10 as far as the watchability rating goes. But I think the only thing they were really missing was like that one superstar prospect, top 100 in baseball type of guy, which isn't there. Maybe in hindsight it will be, but as of the moment, it's not. But my goodness, I mean, every facet, lineup, bench, bullpen, rotation, it's loaded with depth and talent. And yeah, Aberdeen is always good to start the season because it's where the draft picks are going to start their full season, typically, if they had any sort of success or if they're out of college anyway. So you're going to have that to start, but then it's also converging with like the international side of things really coming together, getting some of the better guys up into high A ball to start 2025. And it's I think Aberdeen's just going to be, and maybe who knows with the article that came out this past week, maybe that'll be back in Frederick before too long. But high A is going to be where it's at in the beginning of every season. I feel like moving on. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's especially that lineup. I mean, Austin Overn leading off. That's like one of our guys, right? Our breakout candidate here from the last draft. Griffo Farrell behind him. I'm not as high on him as you guys are, and a lot of prospect outlets are. I just think he's Joey Ortiz without the power, which still pretty solid player. But I'm kind of bearish on him, at least for now. We'll see. Maybe he'll develop and we'll get there. Vance Honeycutt, obviously the ceiling is up here, but the floor is also on the floor. We'll see if he can cut down the swing and miss. Ethan Anderson, Ryan Stafford, Thomas Sosa, Aaron Estrada, Leandro Arias. Like, this is a bunch of breakout candidates in the lineup. Even on the bench, you have Anutis Mordan, Anderson De Los Santos, a past favorite, and I'll let Nick talk about the pitching staff because my God.
Yeah, to go with the lineup though, it's like, yeah, you might have some nights where they don't score a run, but that speaks like the boomer. But you talk about boomer bust and Bowie. I think this lineup also has boom bust potential. There's some more, Griffo Farrell's more like stabilizer, but the highs of this lineup are going to be tremendous, and this is why I'm so excited to watch these Bowie games with this projected lineup because of that. And like, just when you talk about Jed Fabian, Enrique Bradfield, Vance Honeycutt, like, please put Austin Overn in that conversation as well. This is truly elite speed and defense, and with a bat that is trending way up. And I think he is in that same tier as those guys in terms of like prospects. But yeah, it's the Griffo Farrell thing. I kind of like cringe, like, like tasted lemon or something in my mouth. Just like, please don't put Griffo Farrell and Joey Ortiz in the same sentence. Please don't. I don't think they're the same. I am most excited to watch the trio. It's hard to pick like something to like, what do I specifically want to focus on if in this projected Aberdeen roster? Honestly, I went with like Thomas Sosa, Leandro Arias, Aaron Estrada trio because, like Bob mentioned, Aberdeen this year being this potential like first full year for the draft picks. So a lot of question marks. We're all bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, excited to watch those guys in their first full year. But we're also seeing those international prospects are like 19, 20 years old when they start 2025. And these are like the cream of the crop. These are some of the best guys from their class who have beaten the odds. They passed through the DSL. They went through the FCL. They've gone through Delmarva. Now they're here in high A, still as teenagers. So I'm excited to watch that trio. But yeah, the pitching staff, like, we could do a whole full 2-hour episode here. These are our guys that we've talked about over and over and over again for the last year. They took massive leaps forward, and I'm stoked to see between Michael Ferret, Nestor Herman, Trey Gibson, whose 2024 was real. Is it all of them? Is it just one or two? How many of these guys end the year in strong and Bowie? Luis De Leon, even I feel like maybe the shine might be wearing off a little bit with Luis De Leon. He's getting like passed over when Trey Gibson goes undrafted, and then it's like, whoa, he's one of the top strikeout guys in the minor leagues. Nestor Herman getting top 100 talk. Like, Luis De Leon is just like, he really didn't do anything last year, like take a step forward. I feel like he was just kind of stagnant. So like, can he take a step forward next year? Chase Alsup keeps getting written about in Baseball America like every 2-3 weeks. So I'm excited to see what he can do. Didn't see him pitch last year, obviously drafted last year out of Auburn. So I imagine like Baumeister and so many other guys, Levi Wells makes his pro debut in high A. But yeah, Zach touched on Braxton Bragg. That second half of the season, I have his line here. Braxton Bragg, second half of the season, 54 innings, a 2.98 ERA, 73 strikeouts to just 9 walks. That's insane. He is changing the meaning of Braxton Bragg. Google it, see what pops up. This Braxton Bragg is going to change the narrative around his name. Levi Wells, kind of the same thing. He had a shoulder injury last year, and the overall numbers weren't great. I just wrote about him in Substack. He had like a 6-something ERA, but when he came back from the shoulder injury, he threw 20 innings. He had 20 strikeouts and just 5 walks, and walks have been an issue for him going back to his days at Dallas Baptist. So if he can continue that, that would be fantastic. But yeah, my two, I kind of went through like each roster here and was like, who are my two like wild cards? Like, who am I like really going to focus on? And it's Ty Weatherly for the pitching staff. You got to dig deep for the pitcher here because we've talked about these guys so much. I'm going to go Ty Weatherly, former teammate of Chase McDermott at Ball State, undrafted free agent 2023. He's 6'6". He might be 115 pounds if you put some weights on him. But this guy had in Delmarva last year a 2.02 ERA, 50% ground ball rate, and a 34% strikeout rate. The numbers were there. We'll see if he can do in high A. And you mentioned Ethan Anderson, to go back to the hitters real quick. Baseball America had some data on him here. Yeah, so Ethan Anderson as a pro, this is not at UVA. This is in the pro ball ranks with Delmarva, a max EV of 107.8 miles per hour and a 101.6 90th percentile EV. Both of those numbers were two of the highest among all 2024 bats that were drafted. And he also had one of the lowest chase rates and some of the lowest in-zone whiff rates among his peers. So I'm pumped for two things for Ethan Anderson. What does the bat look like across the full season, and where does he primarily play on defense? Is it catcher? Is it outfield? Where does he play there? But Aberdeen, that's going to be the place to be. Bob, you're lucky because you're like right next door. You get to watch this guy. You can just walk on over and catch these guys.
Yeah, I am making a point to get out there more this season, that's for sure. But yeah, I love the bats of Anderson and Stafford both. Don't know where they're going to play long term, but the bats will be there. Yeah, this pitching staff. And first, Ty Weatherly, great stuff. It's got to just control it a little bit, and I think he could be okay. You talked about Braxton Bragg's second half. I did a little bit of research on Blake Money today for the top 50 prospect update that I did for him, and his second half, 53.1 innings, 1.69 ERA, 2.19 FIP, near 29% strikeout rate, under 5% walk rate, 0.84 whip, and a 178 batting average against. Not too shabby for the 6'7" right-handed pitcher. But yeah, it's all about Luis De Leon, Michael Ferret, Nestor Herman, Trey Gibson, Chase Alsop. I mean, that five right there could be, like Vivek says in the chat, top 100 prospects by the end of the season, potentially at least. And I predicted in the article that at least one of them will be. And I also include Keeler Morphe in that. But yeah, the pitching, I don't think you can turn on an Ironbirds game, at least in the first month or two of 2025, and be disappointed by who's on the mound, because even a guy like Levi Wells, who had a disappointing year between injuries and just base numbers, but the stuff is ridiculous. He could definitely put it all together and be a guy that rises with helium too. So like we talked about earlier, AA Bowie, once they get at least some of these guys as the year goes on, they're just going to get more and more watchable. And honestly, Aberdeen's not going to be hurting too bad when they replace some of these guys with the guys coming up behind them. So the lower minors are as good as they've been in a long time for the Orioles.
Let's go down to Delmarva now. And if you followed the Shorebirds in the last 2 or 3 seasons in particular, you've probably noticed a familiar pattern, which is that their roster skews much younger than it used to before the Orioles were heavily involved in international free agency. There's a lot of talent there, and on a good night, they look like a very good team, but then they'll have nights where something just goes off the rails. It could be the pitching, it could be the defense, it could be the lineup. Just doesn't put it together. And what you end up with, it seems like with the Shorebirds, is a win-loss record that is lopsidedly towards losses, and yet that fails to really tell the whole story. Last year, I think, was a perfect example. Their pitching staff, a lot of nights, was one of the most fun to watch in the system, and their offense had its moments. This year, though, and I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts as we break this roster down, it feels like the story could be a little bit different, partially because some of the bats that are going back there, but then also because it feels like some of the younger guys that are going to be going to Delmarva for the first time for a full season, like Ellis Cuevas and Miguel Rodriguez and Edwin Amparo, are maybe a little bit better prepared. And then you add in someone like Joshua Lorenzo, who has a lot of hype. and the lineup could be pretty good. The wild card here for me is Luis Almeida. We know that there's flashes of talent there that he has shown since coming into the system, but much like with a lot of the players we've talked about tonight, health is going to be the key thing for him. The big story with the Shorebirds, though, is the starting rotation. Killer Morphe, who probably did the most of any Orioles prospect to raise his stock last year, tops a rotation that also includes Juan Rojas, Yber Cartaya, Carson Dorsey, Christian Rodriguez, and Jack Crowder. And in Dorsey, Rodriguez, and Crowder, you have a trio of 2024 draft picks that all have distinct profiles, but there are interesting breakout candidates for various reasons. And I actually think that's where I want to start here is with this rotation because, Nick, you wrote up Christian Rodriguez recently on Substack and how he might be one of the more interesting breakout guys in the system. So what do you see from him and really from this whole Delmarva staff?
Yeah, with Rodriguez, yeah, wrote a full article there over on Substack looking at he had a lot of college data available, so that was fun to dive into, and MLB Draft League data. I don't know. He's a tall guy out of California. I just think when you look at his data, he missed 2023 because he had Tommy John surgery. And 2024, the stuff got better and better and better as the year progressed, leading up to his final appearance in the MLB Draft League with the Frederick Keys was, I think, the most dominant performance the MLB Draft League has ever seen in their very short history. And I think someone reached out to, after I wrote that article, someone else found it, a pitching coach somewhere. I forget his name. Sorry. But he reached out and was like, yeah, the stuff is for real. And he was like, he has multiple levels to unlock now that he's healthy and in a pro organization. So hopefully he can. Good fastball, good secondary. Is like, it's pick your guy with that draft class. Those guys we haven't seen yet, it's pick your guy, and you can make a pretty strong case as to why they're probably the most intriguing. But yeah, I like Rodriguez. I love Yber Cartaya. I think if he's bigger, stronger, more refined in 2025, he becomes a top 30 prospect. Juan Rojas is still only 20 years old. I think as of right now, he might be turning 21 soon. Wasn't a super promising performance in the Arizona Fall League, but like, let's see what he can do. Let's see if he can stay healthy. And if he can have a good year when he returns. Who else as far as the pitchers are concerned? Yeah, Carson Dorsey is the pitching wild card here, I think, for me, though. I'm most intrigued by Christian Rodriguez because I think the data was very promising. But Carson Dorsey, I want to repeat what Joe Doyle said about Carson Dorsey. 7th round pick out of Florida State last year. Up to 94 from the left side when he was at Florida State. Potential for 2 double plus offerings. The metrics on his stuff really sing. That turns me on. I'm interested in Carson Dorsey in these draft picks that we didn't see.
Yeah, I was going to say Dorsey's my guy, and I know Vivek in the chat agrees because he's been writing about him in our Discord as well. Yeah, the left-handed pitcher out of Florida State with mid-90s and excellent off-speed stuff. Sounds a little bit like DL Hall. Obviously different, but, if we're getting our hopes up here. But Killer Morphe is the stud that we think is going to be potentially top 5, top 10 prospect in the system by the time the year is over. So that's the highlight. How fast can he run through this minor league system, if they'll let him, or are they going to kind of slow his roll a little bit now that he's in full season ball? I love watching these international position players hit full season ball and seeing them adapt and evolve over the season. This is the first chance we're really going to get a look at them in the FCL. There's better cameras in the DSL than the FCL for some reason. So we really don't get much of them. And then they hit full season ball. They're facing cold weather. We've talked about how, they have to learn how to grocery shop for themselves and stuff like that, while at the same time facing the cold weather and the best competition they've gone up against and the grind of the daily long season. So I just love getting a look at these guys and how they adapt to that. Lorenzo, Almeida, Cuevas, Miguel Rodriguez, Edwin Amparo. How's Braylon Tavera going to do after such a disappointing 2024? Is he going to be able to evolve? And Lorenzo and Raylan Ramos, I wrote about how they had really good 2023 seasons and were on the radar, but then in 2024 they were derailed by injuries. Can they bounce back? And Angel Tejada, he's only 20 years old still. I think he's gotten a taste at high A even, but will he get a real run? Will he continue to improve? Even the bench, Michael Hernandez had an incredible last month of the season, believe it or not. All hope is not quite lost with Michael Hernandez, the big bonus baby who was signed for more money than Samuel Basayo. But yeah, Luis Almeida, is he even gonna? I could see a chance where he actually starts in the FCL before coming up to Delmarva, just because so derailed by injury in his career. He did show flashes last year, but get him healthy, and with the FCL starting earlier now, it could make sense to start him there. But I gave him the push to Delmarva just because I think I'm less worried about his disappointing results in his first couple of years, just because he'd never really got a chance to just go out there every day and put in the work and let the results show for themselves. I think he also got a little bit unlucky with BABIP in his young career, so he's the guy I think could really finally justify his signing bonus.
Yeah, and Michael Hernandez, first of all, he must start smiling at people. But Luis Almeida, yeah, he's a Jersey kid, like first and foremost. Like he's born and raised there in New Jersey, not the DR. So like that adjustment period is not going to be as difficult for him as well. So I do feel like he eliminates a lot of roadblocks and hills that normal international prospects are going to face. So yeah, bumping him up, I think, does make a lot of sense. Yeah, he's had one healthy month in the FCL. Well, in the 2 years, he played in the DSL as well. 2 years, he's had one healthy month, but it was good. And it was the last month of the year. 855 OPS, pair of home runs, 15 walks in 21 games. I'm still there on Almeida. I want to see what he can do. I like Zach's point, though, about last year, this lineup was just so boom bust. I was all about Delmarva, and then you watch some nights, and you're just like, why am I watching this? This is rough. There's no offense whatsoever. But this year I do. It's a little bit older guys, maybe not older as far as age-wise, but like experience-wise. Guys got a little bit more seasoning in the FCL. So like Ellis Cuevas, I want to see if he's a dude. Like 47 stolen bases last year, a 124 WRC plus between two levels. Is he this year's like Leandro Arias, Aaron Estrada, big breakout, under the radar type guy? Joshua Lorenzo, I feel like was like an ankle injury last year. That probably just like zapped him. So we'll see what Lorenzo's got. Miguel Rodriguez cracked our top 50 list as a catcher because he's a teenager with a really impressive hit tool. And yeah, Raylan Ramos, a lot of positive reports on him when they first signed him. He's my like hitter wild card here, just because there's potential that he develops into a pretty solid outfield prospect. I think I have an autographed baseball card of his behind me, actually, that I bought right after they signed him. His was like triple the price of Thomas Sosa, which looking back makes no sense now, but hey, I got it. But yeah, I like Ramos. Let's see what he can do. I think he was like a broken leg. He had something serious that happened to him. And Tavera had the shoulder injury, so maybe that zapped him, I'm sure. I'll give Tavera one more shot, but I'm not super stoked about Tavera. The rest of the guys, though, Almeida, Ellis Cuevas, Raylan Ramos, Joshua Lorenzo, I think those are the guys in still Marvel lineup that I'm most excited to see potentially.
We'll wrap up down in the FCL. And as Bob mentioned in the article, we are hearing that there could be a feed down there next year that's comparable to what Dominican Summer League had. And if you didn't get a chance to watch a DSL game on YouTube this year, it was not the quality of even most low A MILB TV feeds, but it was at least a camera that was positioned behind home plate. You could see the pitch coming into the zone, and there were actually velocity readings to go along with the scoreboard. So not bad production, and certainly better than nothing at this point. Now let's turn our attention to that FCL squad. There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not Jordan Sanchez could skip the FCL and go to Delmarva. Bob, though, has him anchoring a lineup that also includes a lot of interesting hitters. Elvin Garcia, Emilio Sanchez, Steven Martinez, Felix Amparo, Jamon Newell, Nate George, DJ Layton, a pair of 2024 draftees, are among some of the position players that Bob has ticketed for the FCL. The pitching staff, meanwhile, also has some guys you want to watch out for, headlined by Esteban Mejia, a right-hander with very good stuff. He'd be joined by Jesus Palacios, Francisco Morel, Adrian Heredia, Esteban Luna, and Kevin Velasco in the rotation. And then in the bullpen, I'm going to throw out one of my breakouts for 2025, left-hander Andy Fabian. Interesting mix, very, very good curveball. Fastball, not premium velocity, but he has good arm action on it, very good in inducing ground balls. That's actually a guy that I could see in Delmarva at some point in 2025, and maybe he gets an extended taste there because he is a little bit older. I believe he'll be 21 this coming season. So if you want to dig deep a little bit for a possible breakout in the FCL, keep your eye on Fabian. But there is plenty of talent here. But Bob, I want to start with Jordan Sanchez. It is tempting to ticket him for Delmarva because he's a little bit older. He's coming off a flat-out dominant year at the plate in the DSL. But it does in some ways feel appropriate, especially with the FCL season starting a little bit earlier, that maybe the Orioles would hold him back in Sarasota for at least a month or so. So I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, first, Andy Fabian, any relation to Judd? I'm not sure. No. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because my ultimate decision really had to do with FCL is early now, and I think the season ends by end of May or sometime in early to mid-June or something. So
the draft.
Yeah. Okay. That's right. So, yeah, I could just see them at least starting him in the FCL. Maybe he even beats down the door and gets to Delmarva before the end of the FCL season. But I thought there was enough outfield options ahead of him already that could play in Delmarva. If Raylan Ramos is hurt again, then bring him up to start the season. So I wouldn't be shocked if he did, but just keep him with this group of guys because I do think it's like probably the most talented opening day FCL Orioles lineup yet. And that's saying something because I feel like it's gotten a little bit more talented every season. I mean, I just really love this crop of international guys from January 2024. And I think that they really had a great DSL combined between the two teams. The best talents on both teams, I think, is just really, really good. Plus 4 high school draft picks I have on the roster between George Layton, Braylon Whitaker, and Andrew Tess. So I just think there's a lot of young talent here that could break out, and who knows, now it could be in Delmarva at any point during the season and continue to have some breakout players. That's the fun thing about now that the Orioles are just fully fledged, knee deep into the international and some high school guys and stuff. It's like anyone can break out at any time in the lower minors, and it's super fun. And I really like Esteban Mejia, Jesus Palacios, and Francisco Morel as the top 3 in the starting rotation. I think 1 or 2 of those guys could be this year's, I don't want to say Keeler Morphe, but maybe Eber Cartaya, someone that just really by this time next year is like firmly in our top 50.
Yeah, I hope we do get the opportunity to watch FCL games because Elvin Garcia, Jordan Sanchez, Steven Martinez, Emilio Sanchez, like they are going to showcase just how strong this Orioles international pipeline is. Nate George, my favorite pick in last year's draft class, just as far as like intrigue and what is his potential and what does he look like. DJ Layton, of course, too. A lot of hype around DJ Layton. Orioles pretty aggressive on him in the draft. So excited to see these high school guys. Where do they play? What do they look like in their first year? But yeah, there's even another catcher here. I don't know if you guys mentioned it. Adriano Mejia. Like, this is yet another catcher. I'm never going to forget the name just because I think I shared the picture that he was with Orioles personnel and was like, I'm an Oriole. And I shared it, and the Orioles were like, take that down. He's not signed with us. And like 2 months later, he signed with the Orioles. So I will never forget Adriano Mejia. But he is 18 years old, and last year in the DSL, 50 games, 33 walks to 15 strikeouts, and an 811 OPS. Just like Miguel Rodriguez, more walks than strikeouts, impressive hit tool. The Orioles and these catchers, it's unbelievable. And Venezuelan catchers at that. But with the pitching, I'm just excited to see, because one thing we see a lot with the FCL guys in years past, a lot of guys who can throw 100 miles per hour, but they can't find the strike zone to save their life. That's changed. They have guys who can throw 100 miles per hour, Esteban Mejia, but he finds the strike zone. He had 44 strikeouts in 27 innings, 15 walks. It's like not a great walk rate, but way better than what we've seen in the past. That I can't tell you anything about his stuff. I wish I could talk more about stuff with these arms, but Adrian Heredia here, he's a 20-year-old righty. They signed him really late in the process, November of 2023. He pitched 44 innings last year in the DSL, had 56 strikeouts and just 18 walks and a 1.83 ERA. So just scouting the stat line, I'm intrigued. Want to see what he can do. And I want to throw it out again. I know I've outlined this before, but I'm going to again because Henry Tejada is the most fascinating player in this entire system. And I don't know if that means if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I truly don't, because there was a lot of praise for him when he signed in 2022. He's a smaller pitcher. He was like the Keeler Morphe before Keeler Morphe, and maybe not as much velo. But he signed in 2022 at the DR, pitched well that year in the DSL, got suspended and didn't pitch at all in 2023 because of a performance-enhancing drug. 2024, though, he was a DSL All-Star last year, but he only pitched 18 innings with a 2.0 ERA. Baseball America was there. They had a representative, Josh Norris, I believe, at the game, and he gave Henry Tejada the best breaking ball of all the DSL All-Stars, but he didn't pitch again the rest of the season. There's like another month of baseball. He didn't pitch. He looks just like Ofelky Peralta, who is my guy for life. So I'm hooked there, but I have no idea what's up with Henry Tejada. He's clearly got the stuff. We'll see if he makes it to the FCL stateside or not. But yeah, the arms, the big thing with the arms are these guys throw more strikes than ever before. So I'm excited to see who breaks out among this group.
I think there's at least one, and I said this in the article, top 100 prospects on this opening day roster. At least one. Agree? Disagree?
Bats included or just pitchers?
Future, at any point in their career. Either one.
Yeah, I'm buying the Steven Martinez hype. I've seen a lot of other people like this is potentially a guy. I feel like he's how we talked about Thomas Sosa at the beginning of last year, and I'm still very high on Thomas Sosa, but he is like a potentially more refined, even better version of Thomas Sosa. I feel like just from read. Obviously, I haven't watched him live, but just from the number data and articles written about him up to this point.
Yeah, Bob, I saw that you wrote that, and I completely agree with it. I think that you could even go down and you could look at Elvin Garcia and Emilio Sanchez. I think both of those guys, for their age, are pretty advanced defensively, seem to have good bat-to-ball skills. They could perhaps profile as back-end top 100 options if all things go right. But Steven Martinez and Jordan Sanchez, I think, could be right in that mix. And of that group, I think right now Sanchez's power might be the loudest tool in the group. But I agree with Nick that Martinez could possibly surpass him.
We're cutting this part and we're sending it to AJ Preller. Highlights included. Take your pick.
So just to wrap up here, I forgot to mention the watchability ratings for the FCL and Delmarva. Shorebirds, 8 out of 10, pretty good. And then down in the FCL, 8.5 out of 10. We don't have a DSL preview because we don't really know what the DSL rosters are going to look like until after the January international signing period, which is just coming up around the corner. We'll have that for you later this month on Orioles on the Verge. But before I wrap up here tonight, Bob, Nick, any final thoughts you want to add?
I do wonder how Roki Sasaki will do against DSL hitters in the spring and summer of 2025.
This is fun. It's an opportunity. It's a new year. It's an opportunity to just be like, we don't need to sit here and we can sit here and break down guys and talk about their limitations and everything. But this is a chance to dream and have fun. Again, as I'm looking out at a ton, like still 6+ inches of snow on the ground here in Virginia, even though it's been a couple of days. This is when I really start to get excited about the upcoming season, even though we still have a long way to go, but we really don't. And so to have these rosters kind of look at and to still see, like, if we're still doing the draft again with Connor and Locked On Orioles again, there's still a lot of quality depth that the four of us can still put together a nice, fun 4-person draft when we draft the minor leagues, and hopefully in a couple weeks.
Absolutely. And yeah, this is a time to dream. This is what will get me through the doldrums of January and February, the cold weather, the nastiness. So yeah, bring on spring training and bring on baseball season.
We're absolutely looking forward to that. And we have plenty of coverage for you around the corner, as we will be back next week here at Orioles on the Verge. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. You can find Bob's full write-up of these projected rosters there, along with a lot of other great Orioles coverage. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to Patreon and sign up to become a member of our community today. We are in the midst of our top 50 prospects countdown. And in fact, we're in the early stages of it. So if you get in now, you're basically getting in on the ground floor, and you've got most of the list in front of you. Plus, you can go back and listen to the episodes that have already posted and set yourself up for a lot of great bonus coverage to come over the course of the 2025 season. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by BetOnline and part of the Believe Podcast Network.
I want someone to go back and listen to last year's top 50 and let us know how we did.